Given by Larry DeMoss.
All right, before we do the national anthem on our program today, we're going to sing that good old Baylor line. Okay, all up in the air. Here we go. That good old Baylor line, that good old Baylor line, will march forever down the years as long as stars shall shine. We'll fling the gleam and gold afar to light the waves of time and guide us as we onward go. That good old Baylor line. Hey, that's pretty good. A lot of non. I even heard an Aggie or two. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose rough stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you will remain standing, Randall Lucas will bring our invocation.
Prepare yourself in the manner of the custom. Let us take a moment to reflect and give thanks for the opportunity to serve our community. May we be guided by wisdom, compassion, and shared commitment in making a positive difference in this world. May our actions as Rotarians today and every day reflect the values of service above self and bringing hope and kindness to those around us. Now, today we have a lot of yes, everyone can say we have a very large number of all the visitors today. We all appreciate it as Rotarians, as members of the board members, as a so with the guests of all those, the ones that are guests, please stand and be recognized so we can thank you for being here. Thank you.
Larry's going to be on double duty today because we got our July birthdays. So I call your name and you're here. Please stand up. If you're not here, you don't have to. Okay? So birthdays for July, Rotarian birthdays: Jim Alexander, Ashley Allenson, John Cathy, Bob Cargan, Kathy Davis, Carter Dupree, Bradley Ford, Jimmy Haynes, Carter Harris, Stuart Kelly, Randall News, Mike Stone, Matt White, Deborah Whitman. Eric?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to
kind of past due now. So if you forgot, you're forgiven. You'll receive an email this week reminding you, but these are last year's dues that we need to put in the bank as soon as we can. So expect to see that as a reminder that you've forgotten. We also have board leadership positions still open. And if you're curious about that and how much time it takes and all responsibilities, if you'll talk to me or talk to Dana, we will indoctrinate you and convince you that this is exactly how you want to serve the community, okay? Also, our chairman of the day and those giving invocation sign-up sheets are on the front desk. So if you can come to a Rotary meeting, which I hope you can come to all of them, if you will sign up, and we'll contact you prior to the meeting date and remind you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our chairman of the day, Curtis Brown. Curtis has brought the most outstanding programs to this Rotary Club over the last few years. I told him he has to clean it up, so he's going to introduce our program today. Curtis?
Thank you, Rosemary. We have a great interview today, and I get to introduce both the interviewer and the interviewee. Hopefully you all had a chance to read David Kaye's impressive resume on our email notice of the meeting today. I'm only going to mention a few highlights. First, David joined the Army Reserve following his freshman year at Baylor in 2003. He was called to active duty 2 weeks prior to completion of his junior year. He was deployed to the Middle East for 15 months and spent 10 months in Afghanistan. David, thank you for your service. He and his wife have had 4 foster sons who have all been reunified with their families. Thank you for your service. And thirdly, David is in his 16th year in Baylor athletics, where he has served in many positions, including Baylor's first NIL general manager. As you know, he is currently Baylor athletics general manager. Thank you for your service. I asked Mark McCollum to be the interviewer today, as he's the current chair of the Baylor NIL Advisory Council. Mark is the former regent at Baylor, is currently on the board of trustees of the Baylor College of Medicine. In the real world, Mark has served in leading executive roles for the 2 largest global oil field service companies, first as executive VP and CFO of Halliburton, then as president and CEO of Weatherford International, which employs over 25,000 people in over 80 countries. I had that Mark until he and his wife moved to Waco a few years ago. He joined Bible Study Fellowship, and he and I were in the same small discussion group. But we learned that our paths have nearly crossed a couple of times. We both started our careers with Arthur Anderson and Company, and among his many charitable roles, he has served on board Yellowstone Academy, an inner city school in Houston for special needs children, which was founded in 2001 by mutual friends of ours. So join me in welcoming David and Mark. We're going to leave time for questions at the end, and I'm going to start with the first question for Mark. What is the Baylor NIL Advisory Council?
Thanks, Curtis. The Baylor NIL Advisory Council was put together, I think, in late 2001, 2002. Effectively, Mac Rhodes called me one day, and we were NIL was a new thing, and Baylor was about to dip its toe in there, and he basically said, "Mark, I need a group of guys to keep me out of trouble." That was sort of the conversation, and so there were 5 other gentlemen who joined me on this NIL Advisory Council. I served as the chair because I was late for a meeting. But it's been kind of interesting. So early in that, I think David, or as I affectionately call him, DK and I have been working together since about January of 22, and Matt assigned David to keep us out of trouble. And but we were working with Startup Waco, John Passaman, and that group has as our effective collective for Baylor University, as we started sort of operating in this new environment with compensating players for use of their name, image, and likeness, and to try to make sure that, at least for Baylor University, that we were complying with what has been ever-changing, morphing rules along the way, and just making sure that we were always in the middle of the fairway, but also that we were being able to field competitive teams and staying at the forefront of Division I Power 4 athletics. And I think we've done a good, successful job of that, in large part to DK's efforts. Over time, the rules have changed quite a bit, and unless you've been on vacation in Antarctica, you probably have seen a lot of the rule changes along the way. And it's really only been the last few years that it's happened. Not many know, though, that this really started in 2020. And during that time, there were several different class action lawsuits that were filed in the Northern District of California by former athletes. The most significant one was filed by Grant House and Sedona Prince, which you call the House versus the NCAA lawsuit. But all these class actions, in some form or fashion, allege that the NCAA, through their scholarship limitations that they set on universities, as well as their rules around not compensating players or by the universities or by other organizations, were in effect a violation of the Sherman Act, which was an anti-monopoly federal law that's passed many years ago that said that effectively the NCAA was operating as a monopoly and were constraining trade, and that was anti-competitive, and they wanted an injunction against the current rules as well as damages. And finally, the settlement has been working for a number of years, but it finally, I guess back in June of this year, the judge there in the Northern District finally approved the settlement. And this settlement is a landmark settlement. I mean, it is big in terms of what it changed, because for the first time in history, athletes can be legally compensated for their name, image, and likeness by universities. And there's a damages component of this too. So I was going to start the discussion today with getting David, who's really the expert. He's the point of the spear on all things NIL. And can you sort of describe what are the terms of the House settlement? Help us understand what it means for college athletics.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So the House settlement, obviously, it's a lengthy settlement, so we can't go into all the details of it, but I'll try to hit the high points. It essentially, there's multiple things it does. One of them is it removes all scholarship restrictions. They basically said if schools are willing to give scholarships to athletes, they should be able to get it. And so now what they have are roster size maximums. So in baseball, the most you can have on your roster is 34. If your school is willing to give 34 full scholarships, you can now do that. In golf, the maximum is 9. And so that's one major component of it, is that scholarships are now unrestricted. If you have a spot on a college athletics team, that university is able to give you a full scholarship if they choose to do so. Obviously, there's a lot of factors of that, costs associated with it, and then Title IX compliance in the way that you distribute your scholarships. But the main point of the settlement is that schools can now give up to $20.5 million per year in payments to their student athletes for the use of their NIL. There's various factors of that. If you give new scholarships above what you were previously giving, some of those count against that cap, up to $2.5 million worth. I will tell you at Baylor, we're giving about $1.9 million of new scholarships. So our pool of money that we can give to the athletes is reduced by that $1.9 million. So now we have about $18.6 million that we can give to our athletes. And that changes every year. It goes up by 4%. And twice during this 10-year settlement, the plaintiffs have the ability to do a recalculation where that 20.5 will end up going significantly higher. I think that's probably going to happen about 2 years from now when these new TV contracts kick in, and I think it'll end up being 23, 24 million. But for right now, it's 20.5, and we have to plan for that next year is going to go up by 4% as well. And so schools have to make their own decisions on how they want to distribute that 20.5 million. At Baylor, we've looked at probably 50 to 60 different models of how we're going to do that. The one we settled on leans heavily on the way they're distributing the back pay in the settlement. So another major component of the settlement is that 2.8 billion of damages are being issued to student athletes that participated from 2016 until now. And that is being distributed using a 75-15-5-5 model, which means 75% goes to football student athletes, 15% to men's basketball, 5% to women's basketball, and then 5% to all the other sports.
How did they arrive at that?
That's a great question. I honestly couldn't tell you how they came to that determination. I think they looked at all kinds of different metrics, and it was based on revenue, if we're honest. They looked at the revenue in the different
Like
sports.
TV contracts and things like that.
Absolutely, TV contracts, ticket sales. They don't take into account capital campaign gifts, but there's different factors in this where they come to this 20. The 20 billion number is 22% of the average Power Forward revenue of these different buckets. So they subtract capital gifts and certain other things, but like licensing revenue, ticket sales, TV contracts, all of that is factored in for each Power 4 school, and then they take the average and say 22% of the average is how you arrive at that number, and that's how they got to the 20.5 million. So as the TV contracts get bigger, when they do a recalculation of this, that 22% is going to be more than 20.5 million. And so our model relies heavily on that. We looked at one that was based entirely on our revenues, ultimately decided it was going to do harm to some of our most impactful brand sports. And so the model we settled on, we have 6 sports that you would essentially consider our high brand value sports. And it's football, volleyball, men's and women's basketball, and baseball and softball. And it obviously works out great that that's 2 fall sports, 2 winter sports, and 2 spring sports, and it's a men's and a women's sport in each of those seasons. But we also looked at the numbers, and it's fairly obvious there's separation between what those 6 sports do for your brand value and for revenue compared to the remaining 13 sports. And so our model has budgets for each of those 6 sports that I work with the coaching staffs, and they can allot NIL contracts to the different athletes on their team using their budget. And then all other sports, we have a base agreement that we offer to every student athlete. They don't have to sign it, but if they want it, it's there for them. It pays them $250 a year just for the very basic use of their NIL. And then, we do contracts for each of these. The $250 contracts are not, we're not going to terminate those. We're not going to fight those. But the sports that have different budgets that they can assign, all of those contracts have your typical language in them.
So DK, do you have any insight into how other universities in the Big 12 or like the Power 4 conferences are allocating their funds?
Yes.
For sports?
Yeah, the vast majority are following the back pay model. So the truth is you're going to get sued one way or another, and so you have to pick the model that you think is the most legally defensible, but also one that works for the best for your school. And so following the back pay makes a lot of sense. If you don't follow the back pay, if we went to a model that paid 50% to football, we'd likely get sued by our football players saying, why did the previous football players get 75% of the revenue and we're only getting 50%? So it makes sense to follow the back pay model. We're not following it exactly. We make some accommodations based on our individual revenues. But there's lots of different ways you can do it. My understanding is the vast majority of schools are following a similar model of back pay. And like I believe Texas has 5 brand impact sports that they're giving budgets to when everyone else gets low number. Some schools aren't offering every student athlete a deal. We feel legally defensible. We should offer every student athlete a deal. But we couldn't talk to those schools. That would be considered collusion if we were setting our numbers based on talking to all those other schools. So what we see is what you all see. We track it closely. We see what's reported in the media, and that can help inform your decision making. But I feel really good about that we're not doing anything that makes us an outlier. It makes us competitive.
So one of the questions that I've gotten before is, let's say you're a school that doesn't have a football program, okay? Or you've always been more competitive in basketball, say at Duke. Don't know this for a fact. Let's say, is there a way that maybe you could allocate the funds a different way? Are you seeing schools allocate in a way that sort of heavily throws it toward one sport?
You identified the first major flaw with the settlement. So the reality is the settlement is not the final solution. It is the first step. We need multiple other things to happen before we can get college sports to a really good place, and I do believe it's going to happen. But the settlement was the first step, and it was a huge one to finally get across the finish line. One of the big flaws is that if you do not have football, if you're able to generate the revenue to fund it, you could, in theory, for your basketball programs, you could do 12 million to men's basketball, 6 million to women's basketball. And so the Big East schools, the Gonzagas, if they could fund it, could do that. And funding it is much easier said than done because they don't have the football revenue to drive that. But I would imagine Kansas is doing significantly more than 15% to men's basketball because their revenue for basketball supports it. They have a 16,000 seat arena that's packed out. They can raise ticket prices. They can do that. Do the same way. Kentucky, I'm sure, is doing the same thing, although they need to be competitive in football in the SEC. So I couldn't tell you exactly how Kentucky's doing it. But that is a major flaw of the settlement, is that there's no accommodation, no cap per sport. So every school can do it their own different way. The only way that we can bring this to a good place is if you eventually get to collective bargaining and you set a cap for each individual sport. And I think that's going to happen, but we're probably a year or two away from that. And so the thing I'm a men's basketball sport administrator, so I work closely with Scott Drew, and he's nervous about the Big East factor and saying, well, if they have 3 times the budget that we do, how are we supposed to compete? And what I told him is, I promise you Kentucky is not going to sit back and let Providence steal their best players. Like, they're going to get to a good place on this. There's going to be a lot of angst and a lot of seeing how this goes this next summer, because the next summer is the first time that this settlement is really effective. During this past summer, schools were able to front load the contracts using their collectives, and so it was more whatever you could raise, you could do. Moving forward, like Baylor, even if we had a donor who said, I want to give $10 million to men's basketball, we couldn't give that out in NIL because we're reaching that $20.5 million cap already. Whereas if Gonzaga has a donor step forward and say, I want to give $10 million to men's basketball, they probably have that space in their cap to do that. So, like I said, that's a flaw of the settlement. I'm not going to lie about it. We need more to happen before we can get college sports to a good place, and that's one.
So let's talk a bit about name, image, and likeness. NIL, it's been the collectives, right, that were formed by all the schools. That's where the big money has been going, heretofore, right? And even though it was probably in its creation designed to be, where an athlete would sell the use of their name, image, and likeness for a proper business purpose. Obviously, the flaw in the system before was that collectives could just basically give money, and oftentimes it ended up being a pay for play. And there's been reports, I think Ohio State last year's been fairly public about spending about $25 million for their football program. And of course, we did the Baylor line earlier. There may be a Texas Tech guy. They've been pretty adamant that they're spending $55 million on their football program this year. So let's talk a minute about what happens to NIL under the House settlement.
Yeah, so under the House settlement, true business purpose, third-party NIL deals can still happen. And so the way to think about it is, it's really NIL the way it was intended to be. If a college football kicker makes videos for YouTube and is able to monetize them on YouTube, he should be able to do that. If Robert Griffin had been able to sell jerseys with Griffin III on the back, I would imagine a lot of people in this room bought a number 10 Baylor jersey back in that time. It just didn't say Griffin III. We all knew it was number 10 for a reason. He should have earned a royalty on that. And so that is all still permissible. What is not permissible are the pay-for-play deals. The one where a donor gives $100,000 to a collective, and a collective goes and does a $100,000 deal with an athlete and says, go do my social media post for us, and we're going to pay you $100,000. So in this new settlement, there is a system called NIL Go, and it's run by Deloitte, the national accounting firm. And so any third-party deal that pays $600 or more has to go through this NIL Go system, and it gets approved or denied based on various factors. First thing they look at is this a legitimate business purpose? And we've helped some of our athletes get legitimate business purpose NIL deals that go through there and are approved. They also look at, is this paid at a fair rate of compensation? So you can't be paid $1 million to do one social media post if you don't have any social media following. That's just not reality. And so that's what Deloitte is looking at. And they have all kinds of algorithms, people much smarter than I, who are looking at these deals and assessing whether they are a true business purpose and at a fair rate of compensation. And then they can approve or deny deals. What we need to happen is we need someone who had a deal denied and went through with it anyway to get punished severely. That's the only way this is ever going to work, is if people get scared of doing those kind of things. And so we have this new group called the College Sports Commission, and they're charged with all of this enforcement. So NIL Go, the Des Moines folks, if they, whatever they come up with, whether it's approved or denied, they report it to the College Sports Commission, and that has a CEO named Brian Seeley, who has done enforcement as part of Major League Baseball in the past. I think he's a really good hire. He's going to handle this. And so he gets the report from them. Des Moines is not telling him what to do. They're only telling him, is this a legit deal or not? And then he gets to decide, and he's got a lengthy list of enforcement mechanisms he can use, both with the student athlete and with the school. And so my hope is that in the near future, you'll see the College Sports Commission issue some stiff penalties for those who are violating the terms of the settlement. I think right now everyone is going out of their way to not violate the terms because no one wants to be the first to get hit. And because you were able to front load deals from collectives this year, it hasn't been as necessary. Whereas moving forward, any deal you want to do, you can't use your collective that way anymore. It has to be a true business purpose.
So I was going to ask you, there's been a number of media reports that have come out about NILs, sort of, continue to make a lot of noise. I mean, you get the feeling that there's a number of schools, at least, that intend for their collectives to continue to operate. Is that because they're really seeing that they can sort of prove out this legitimate business purpose, or is it that they're just, hey, just want to keep all our options open?
Well, I'll tell you, we want to keep our options open because we want to see how this goes. But what I think is happening is that, you said the number, okay, Texas Tech, if they paid $50 million to the football roster this year, well, next year under the terms of the settlement, they might have 14 or 15 million. How are you going to reset that? How are you going to go to your athletes and say, hey, I know you made $500,000 last year, we can only give you $200,000 this year. Nothing you did, it's just that our budget is 35% of what it was last year. And so I think everyone's nervous about that, of how is that going to go? Is anyone actually going to believe it? And so everyone's trying to make sure they have options if there is no enforcement around this. If there's no enforcement of the collectives, then we will be right back where we were, only with a new $20.5 million bill on our rolls every year. So the things you've seen in the news recently, I would say don't believe everything you've seen. The collectives are challenging the settlement, saying we should be able to do true business purpose deals. And the settlement administrators the CSC has initially said, no, we're not going to allow any collective deals. We're not going to allow donor-funded deals, where the donor gives the money to the collective and the collective turns that into cash. And now collectives have said, well, what about if we generate our own revenue and we want to do a true business deal? And that's where you're seeing some of this news being broken, is that collectives have said, okay, if I host a gala and we want to pay a student athlete to promote the gala, we should be able to do that. And if it's at a reasonable range of compensation, I think they will be able to do that. But who knows who leaked it, but there's ongoing negotiations with the collectives and the CSC that does the enforcement. They have not settled on anything yet. I would not believe everything you've seen in the news that says that the collectives can now do what they were doing before. That's not true. What they're fighting for is to be able to do true business purpose deals. And the terms of the settlement say the collectives can still operate as a marketing agency. So at Baylor, we use Playfly to do our multimedia rights deals. Any sponsorships go through Playfly. We have an arm of Playfly called Playfly Max that is focused on getting NIL deals for our athletes that are true business deals. And that is all still permissible. We're using Playfly Max for that. Some other schools are using their collectives for that. Collectives can still go to businesses and find legitimate deals and then pass them to athletes. What they can't do is take a huge donation from a donor and just turn that into a fake NIL deal.
That's very good. So, do you have any insight, into how Lloyd's going to determine market value? Business purpose seems a bit more clear, right? It's always in the eye of the beholder, but like market value, I guess one of the things is it going to be based on, sort of the relationship with the individual athlete, who that person is? Is it the market? Could Austin values of contracts be more in Austin than Waco? That's one of my fears, right? Have they had any kind of discussion about how they're going to gauge that?
We did a ton of onboarding in the months before the settlement, where we talked through a lot of this with the folks from Deloitte. They have various factors they look at. The most significant is the social media following of the student athlete, who, if they're doing a social media post, their engagement is what should really matter to the value of a post. And so we help our athletes and we encourage them in building their brands to maximize how much they can earn in NIL deals. They do also look at the the market size. However, they look at the school's market penetration as well. To give you an example, Georgia Tech has a different market penetration in Atlanta, and Georgia has different market penetration in Atlanta than Georgia State, that's also located in Atlanta. And so they look at all of those different things. I wish I could tell you I knew exactly what their formula is. None of us do. What we do know is they have all kinds of formulas they look at. I don't think they're looking to deny reasonable deals. They're only looking at, okay, we have to identify the completely fake ones that are donor funded, the school had a hand in orchestrating as a way to circumvent the cap. And the one thing that gives me the most hope with this is that there is anti-circumvention as part of the settlement. So if a school does something that by the letter of the settlement is permissible today, the settlement administrator can go back and work with the plaintiff's attorneys and close that loophole and say, this is intended to circumvent this hard cap that we now have, and we're going to permit it. And so schools can get hammered for that. One of the questions that I've had a lot of people ask, well, if you only have to disclose a $600 deal, why don't we just go get a bunch of our donors to give $599 deals to all of our student athletes? And that is clear cap circumvention. If we were orchestrating that, they would hammer us for it and say, you're doing this intending to circumvent the cap. And I would even argue that might get you in trouble with the U.S. government because, the reason there's a $600 threshold is for tax reporting. If you're getting $599 deals to avoid the tax reporting, I would imagine the IRS would have something to say about that.
Probably would. Are there remedies that exist for a school? Like it feels like that the market value standards are not being applied fairly or consistently. I mean, like, are aware, like, hey, somebody else is getting away with something that literally is egregious. I mean, is there an appeal process, I guess, in this whole review?
There is, and I'm sorry if my microphone's really loud. One of the key things is that the student athletes have to be the ones to report these deals in NIL. There's no one who can report it on their behalf. They can set up an authorized user like an agent if they have one to input the initial data, but they still have to be the one to go in and click submit so that they can't come back later and say, oh, I didn't know that information was entered. The agent screwed that up. The athlete has to do the final submission. And so it's really on the athlete to navigate this. And now they come to us and ask for help when they need it. But if a deal gets denied, they have multiple different remedies. They can revise and resubmit it. If it's a deal they've already done, they can pay the money back and maintain their eligibility. And then ultimately, if they just feel like this is the wrong determination, they can take it to binding arbitration. And that is a process through this whole thing. We will assist them with that if it's one that we believe in. And so the schools are able to pay the costs associated with binding arbitration if we choose to do so. I think we'll do that on a case-by-case basis. If a student athlete goes out and gets a deal that we know is ridiculous, but they want to go to arbitration, we're not going to help them with that. But if it's something that we help orchestrate, we would absolutely help them navigate that arbitration process. And I have yet to see anyone go through that yet. I'm really curious to see how that goes when that time comes. But there is a remedy for that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So let's shift gears for a minute. Transfer portal, right? A lot of the frustration in this whole process has been with the, I'm going to call it unrestricted free agency that the transfer portal has created in this process. In particular, I hear a lot of consternation from Baylor alums that basically, you write an NIL deal, it seems very one-sided. An athlete can walk out the door even after payment and really has no sort of obligation to the university or to the athletic program, and you feel like it's sort of like one and done. Even if it's just changing schools every single season. So now it's my understanding that the House settlement doesn't change anything about the transfer portal rules, but is there anything in the settlement that gives the university, particularly Baylor, some more teeth and the ability to write into the contract something that kind of at least creates some financial disincentives?
Absolutely, and it's on each school to navigate that, and that's probably the most important part of my job is how to navigate that. So one thing that helps is that the school's paying the student athlete now, so we get to decide whether we terminate the contract or not. Whereas when a collective was doing it, we really have to be kind of hands-off on that. I will tell you the way that Baylor contracts work, they run July 1st to June 30th. And that aligns with this budget year that we have as part of the settlement. The $20.5 million is July 1st to June 30th. Every student athlete who has, in these 6 sports, they have monthly payments on the first of the month in their contract. And the day they enter the transfer portal, it is written in the contract. That contract automatically terminates and they will get no further payments, no proration, no further payments at all. And so it benefits us, like with football, half of their payments come after the season through that following spring. And so if they transfer at the end of the season, they're going to miss out on half of the money that they were allotted. If they transfer at the end of the spring, they still miss out on, I would say, 2 of the 12 payments. And then basketball, the season runs through April, so they might only miss out on May and June payments. But you have some way to build an incentive to get them to stay. One of the flaws and things we run into is that I will tell you, I don't know of any schools doing multi-year deals with student athletes because there's no teeth to them. If the athlete outperforms, then they're either going to say, I need to renegotiate my contract, or I'm going to go to the transfer portal. And if they underperform, you're stuck with it. So we haven't done any multi-year deals. I mentioned there's things that we need to have happen, and if we get to collective bargaining, I will believe in multi-year deals and think that we could do them just like professional teams do, and you can actually enforce them. Right now, there's really no teeth to a multi-year deal. We're working with our Office of General Counsel for when we do this next retention window at the end of football season, and that if we sign a student athlete, we need to have some damages into that contract, where if they sign for the following year and then leave anyway, there's some damages associated with it. We weren't able to do that. There was a very high-profile one with our men's basketball team this last year, who we had signed through our collective and through Baylor to a contract for this next year. And then they entered the transfer portal anyway, and our only revenue was to terminate the contract. Now, what I will tell you is we're not stupid, and we did not issue a single payment to that athlete. It was all built in to be paid after the transfer portal had closed, and he was locked into Baylor. That particular case, the agent asked for earlier payments, and we said, no, we're not going to do that. So I will tell you, I don't know of a single student athlete at Baylor, even through our collective before I was really involved in it, who received money after they entered the transfer portal. We build our contracts as wisely as we can to incentivize them to stay. And I will say that it is working for our football program. We had the lowest, fewest amount of transfers in the Big 12 last year. And then we also lost, I did a bunch of calculations, it was really the least impactful transfers. Not all transfers are equal. If someone who's not playing at all, that's not as impactful as if you lose a really high profile transfer. And we looked at that and we're like, wow, we really, our retention with football was tremendous. With men's basketball, it was a little different story. But I will tell you, again, not all are equal. We could have fought to keep more of those student athletes, particularly those who were young and more developmental. But some of these, it's just, if they have unrealistic expectations, you have to move on. And that's a change from the college athletics that I grew up and loved. You have to treat it more as a business now. And so, we lost a football decommit recently, who I'm perfectly fine with, because what we had agreed to made sense for us. It didn't make sense for us to go any higher. And so if they're going to leave and go somewhere else that's willing to give them more, best of luck to you. Now we have more funding to get someone else. We're not going to do crazy things to try to retain players or to bring in new players.
Well, I'm also going to say, obviously the quality of our coaching staff and the nature of Baylor's mission, as a Christian organization, Mac's sort of standard in terms of a sort of creating, and growing in life skills and all that. We're looking for a different kind of player, and we've been successful, I think, in fielding teams at significantly less than others have been able to, because they want to come, they want to play for Scott, they want to play for Dave.
And Nikki, and our women's basketball retention has been incredible. But yes, every student athlete who came back on our football program this year could have gotten more elsewhere. And I'm upfront with them about that. When I sit down with a recruit for football, I tell them, if you're looking for the highest dollar amount you're going to get anywhere, there's 120 Division I football programs, someone's going to be willing to give you more than what we're going to give you here. We're going to be upfront with you, and we're going to try to make it high level not be a factor for why you don't choose Baylor. But we don't ever want it to be the reason you choose Baylor. If everything else lines up, you fit with the coaching staff, you're a high character kid, we want to make sure you're not saying, I really want to be at Baylor, but the NIL is just not competitive enough. And so, absolutely, I've talked extensively with our coaching staffs about that. They have to continue to do a great job of ensuring student athletes want to remain at Baylor, because that's where you get the most value, is if the student athlete is willing to stay for less than they could get elsewhere. And I think Dave Moran in particular has done an absolutely incredible job. Our football program is going to be really good this year because of the retention that we had, and all of them. I mean, some of the stories I can tell on what they were offered by other schools illegally, it will make you proud to be a Baylor Bear if you knew what our quarterback turned down to stay at Baylor.
I want to ask one last question, then we'll open up to the floor. what can Baylor donors do at this point in time, given what we know now, to better support, Baylor, help it compete across all sports at the highest level?
Well, first thing is, if you own a business and you're able to do a true business NIL deal, we can work with you and find something that truly benefits your business, but also benefits Baylor student athletes and helps us be competitive. And if that's something you're interested in, please connect with me, and I will make the connection to Brian in Playfly Max, who can help you navigate that. It's much simpler than it might seem. The beauty of working with Playfly Max on that is that you can just pay them and they can orchestrate all the contracting, all of that, all the tax reporting. You don't have to do any of that. You're just treating it as a sponsorship deal. And so Brian can help you navigate. It's super easy and it would really help our teams. And then if you don't own a business, just continue to support the Baylor Foundation. The thing with this $20.5 million that I think is a bit of a misconception, we're not being handed this money. We have to generate an additional $20.5 million every single year just to be able to navigate this. So college athletics, the business of college athletics is very expensive and it's going to continue to climb. And we need continued support through Baylor Foundation, through ticket sales, buy student athlete jerseys in the bookstore, things like that. They make a difference.
That's great. Questions from the floor? There's one back here.
What is the minimum GPA that a student athlete has to maintain in order to play on a team and to receive NIL funding?
So, I think you all heard the question, but it was, what is the minimum GPA you have to remain on the team and to receive NIL funding? All of our contracts require that they be academically eligible to compete for their team. So it's the NCAA academic standards that determine that. It varies depending on where you are at in your progress toward degree, but essentially the baseline is a 2.0 GPA, which is very achievable. I feel like if you're not achieving a 2.0, it's usually because you're not trying. But yes, as long as you meet NCAA academic eligibility standards, you will continue to receive your NIL payments. Now, if you lose your academic eligibility, payments stop immediately. And there's 2 football student athletes right now who have contracts and are not receiving payments because they're academically eligible. And they have an opportunity to get eligible on August 16th, and they know that, and there's a lot of money on the line for them if they can get eligible. But if you're not able to play for our team because you're academically eligible, you don't get any payments.
And you probably won't play for anybody else.
Yeah, no, you can't. The standards are the same everywhere. So if you're academically ineligible at Baylor, you're going to be academically ineligible.
Yes, sir.
So what are the rules on really large, PG quarterback getting $6.8 million? You're 18 years old, you don't have money. What are the rules on these large compensations? How do they protect the student?
I couldn't hear the last part.
Well, how do they protect the student? An average 18-year-old can't get over $6 million.
Talk about how you're setting up their compensation accounts.
Yeah, that's a really difficult thing, and you've identified a big issue. So the way we do our payments is through a system called TeamWorks Wallet, and through TeamWorks Wallet, the student athlete has to go set up an account in TeamWorks Wallet, it's a partnership with Wells Fargo, and it's a digital bank account. But they have to set it up in their name. They can do it if they have a business entity, like if they're under an LLC, they can do that, or they can do it under a personal account. But they set it up under their name, they get a debit card, they get Apple Pay, and we pay into that account. Now, what the athlete chooses to do with that money at that point is up to them, but there's some protection there, because a lot of student athletes come to college and they set up their bank account when they were under 18, their parents are still on it, and their parents are taking some of their money. And I can tell you some really sad stories about international basketball student athletes who never get a dime of their money because they had some handler who told them, put it in this, used it. If you were just giving them a direct deposit for it, they don't know what they're doing. They plug in the account numbers and think that their money's safe, and they never get it. And that's why I really like this TeamWorks Wallet system, is it has to go directly to the student athlete. And we do a lot of education with them to make sure they understand what all that means and to not go pass off your money to just anyone. And then one of the beauties of the TeamWorks Wallet system is that every student athlete who sets it up, there's really 3 accounts in there. And you've got a routing number and 3 different account numbers. And there's the general spending account, there's a interest earning savings account, and then there's an interest earning tax reserve account. And so we have it set where the student athlete can adjust these numbers however they want, but you can set up your payments where 35% of your payments go directly into this tax reserve account and you never even see them. I mean, it's in an account that you have, but you don't feel like you can spend it, and it's earning interest. And so when we do the onboarding in the TeamWorks Wallet system, we highly encourage our athletes to set at least 35% to go to the tax reserve account. And then we have a partnership with a local firm, JRPT, that helps us navigate, helps our student athletes navigate tax prep. Because I feel like that's the next big thing you're going to see is schools that are paying $20.5 million getting sued because they didn't educate their student athletes on the taxes. We can't withhold their taxes; they have to pay them. And so, helping our student athletes understand what all that means, helping them understand that they're filing as self-employed. So the first time they file, obviously you've got the 15th deadline, but then if you want to avoid penalties, you're making quarterly payments over the next year. And so we do a ton of education on that, and even with recruits, when I sit down with a recruit, I give them a form that shows if they come to Baylor, here's the payments you're going to receive on the exact days, exact amounts, and then at the bottom of that form are their quarterly tax payment dates, and I do education on that. And that's something I think has really helped us. We've had a lot of recruits and parents come out of there saying they felt a lot more informed on NIL after visiting with us. And I tell them all, whether you come here or not, you're going to be dealing with the same thing. We want to make sure that you're well prepared for that.
Good. I think we've got time for one more question. One more? Yes.
You talked about Baylor using play flies to facilitate legitimate skills. Some schools do with collection. Is there some sort of follow the money component line? Because it seems like those using collectors could recruit businesses for to engage in legitimate deals with their athletes. Is they substitute engage in a legitimate deal directly with that business to affect longer money, right?
Yeah, there absolutely is a follow the money aspect to this, and that's honestly what NIL has said is that's what we're going to be looking at first and foremost. Where did this money come from? Now, look, there's been cheating in college athletics for decades. I would imagine there will continue to be cheating. That's where we need strong enforcement when it gets caught. And I'm a lot more confident in the CSC than I was the NCAA. The NCAA had its hands tied because it was constantly being sued. The CSC has a lot more opportunity to do enforcement. Again, though, one of the other things we need is the federal legislation that I think is going to happen and will provide an antitrust exemption. That's a huge step forward so that we can actually set our own rules.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously you may have seen President Trump issued an executive order this past week that goes straight at that, but really he was teeing up for Congress to pass legislation. There is legislation pending in the House. Senate's going to be a little bit tougher, but hopefully that will fix, federal law around this. Roll up all these different variances that we have in state law, and hopefully create some consequences around bad actors. Hey, you have time for one more. Get one more.
How much of the work you do with students versus parents versus agents? Who's the agent model of that?
And not all agents are bad. I've had some great agents to deal with. What I find is that the agents who represent professional athletes are fantastic. They want the best for their athlete. They want to help them get to that next level where the real payday is. One of the problems that we need solved with this federal legislation is legitimate agent registry. And that's in the legislation that would help us. And then capping how much the agents can make, because I ran into an agent who takes 20% of the student athletes deals, which is absolutely absurd. Professional level, the max share takes 5%. And so the legislation, the SCORE Act that's circulating right now, caps agent compensation at 5%. So to answer your actual question, it's not as big as you think. In basketball, pretty much everyone has an agent. In football, I've probably dealt with agents on 15% of them. And the vast majority of those were great, and we had a great working relationship. We navigated contract language. We actually just this last week finally got every single contract to the finish line. Even though payments started on July 1st, there were some athletes who didn't yet receive that July 1st payment because we were still working with their agent on contract language. But there will continue to be more and more agents as the money gets bigger. But I think if this federal legislation passes and caps their compensation at 5% of the deals, that will really help us to navigate it, because right now anyone can claim they're an agent and take 20% of a kid who just doesn't know any better.
Thanks, DK.
Thank you.
Thanks to both of our guests today. That was supposedly, or probably, the most enlightening and confusing explanation of current events we've had in a while. Very much. I want to re-welcome all of our Rotary guests today. We appreciate you coming. We do have applications out on the registration desk. If you'd like to become a Rotarian, that makes PayPal happy that I say that. Our next meeting is August the 11th. We'll be switching presidents next month, so Dana will be back. Our program will be given by the Waco ISD Superintendent Tiffany Spicer. We've not met her yet at Rotary. We look forward to that. We'll also have a presentation of the Rotary scholarships that will be given out for this year, last year, I guess. If you'll now join me in the four-way test.